Okay. Thank you very much for your patience. We had a bit of a technical difficulty there, but now we are good to go. And welcome to eBacon's webinar, Payroll and Labor Law Changes for 2025. My name is Shauna Coronado, and I'll be your host for today's session. And I want to remind you to get your free annual construction payroll checklist for attending live. You can find it in the materials section at the top right of the screen. And before we dive in, let me introduce Andrea Porter. Andrea is our Director of HR Services and is our resident payroll compliance expert with years of workforce management experience in the construction payroll industry. eBacon is the nation's leading certified and construction payroll and workforce management platform. We empower contractors and subcontractors with tailored solutions like certified payroll, fringe benefits, and time tracking to simplify HR tasks and drive success in the construction industry. Now, the agenda today. In today's session, we'll cover changes to the exempt salary thresholds, new federal contractor reporting requirements, updates to state mandated paid leave and pay transparency laws, plus many more essential updates to help you kick off the new year with confidence. We'll also have a live Q&A session toward the end, so be sure to jot down your questions and drop them in the chat area. It's up here. Okay, let's get started. Andrea, over to you.
Thank you, Shauna. So we are going to start with some good news to kick off our 2025 update. In a win for employers, in November, a federal judge blocked a Department of Labor rule that increased the salary threshold for certain exempt employees. So, under the Fair Labor Standards Act, the most common exemptions, your executive, administrative, and professional exemptions, employees must qualify for the exemption based on their job duties. So, they must be paid a salary, they must be paid a salary that is at least the established threshold, and then those job duties. So, it's a three-legged stool. All three components must be met for the employee to be exempt from overtime. The rule was set to increase January 1st to just shy of 59,000, and now, because it's been blocked, it's reverted back to what it was two times before, to just over 35,000 or $684 a week.
Okay.
Interestingly, this also reverted the July 1 increase from 2024. So not back to 43,000, but we're going all the way back to the 35,000 threshold. This
So,
also
Andrea,
reverted, yeah.
oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yep. No, that's okay. It's also reverted the highly compensated exemption. It's not used very often, but if you are using that for any of your managers, that's now 107,000 back to that rate. So while employees must still meet all three components of the EAP exemption requirements, the salary threshold is much easier to meet, which I know has brought relief to many employers. Employers looking to make changes in light of the blocked rule should carefully weigh any options before reducing salaries.
Okay. For businesses that adjusted their thresholds in 2024, what strategies would you recommend navigating the rollback?
Sure. I think they should review the specific changes made and the reasoning behind them, along with anything else that may have changed, such as job duties or organizational structure. So, whether salaries were increased or employees were changed to hourly, employers really need to evaluate the impact on morale and productivity, not just the financial impact on their budget. So, keep in mind some employees value overtime pay, if there even is any, and others value the perceived status of being a salaried employee and not having to punch a clock.
What about state exempt salary thresholds?
Yeah, so do remember some states have a higher exempt salary threshold than federal, and those are listed there on the screen. So you need to comply with your state's requirements. They're higher. And then as you can see, New York varies by location, and in Washington state, that varies by business size. So just something to keep in mind if you're in one of those states.
Federal contractors and reporting requirements.
Okay, so this is an old requirement that was discontinued way back in 1995 because the reports were burdensome for employers to create and the information provided did not appear to be utilized by the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, OFCCP. So now the agency argues that it would be able to leverage electronic systems to review the reports. And their goal is to strengthen OFCCP's enforcement, outreach, and compliance assistance activities and help the agency better meet its mission of protecting workers in the construction trades as employment discrimination continues to be a problem in the construction industry. So that's their why. What this means for employers is monthly reporting. So it's similar to the annual EEO1 report, including total employee count and hours worked. And you're going to report each of those by race, gender, and classification. For this report, that classification is your foreperson, journey worker, apprentice, etc. So the reports will be submitted either by Excel or PDF. There is a template for both of those available on the OFCCP's website. They are due the 15th of each month. The first one is due April 15th for the reporting period of March. But we are waiting to see if this requirement gets blocked by the new administration. So that's something, if you are a federal contractor subject to this reporting requirement, I would keep a close eye on it to see if it's something that you will need to do.
Makes sense. And what about the mandatory paid sick leave?
Yeah, if this is new to you in your state, welcome to the club. California was the first state to require that employers provide paid sick leave in 2014. And here in Arizona, ours has been in effect since 2017. So we are well versed with these requirements. The states adding paid sick leave requirements in 2025 are listed on the screen, along with states that already had laws in place, including a couple that require paid time off. So this is time off for any reason, and some that require unpaid time off. So Alaska, Missouri, and Nebraska are going to require either 56 or 40 hours of paid sick leave annually, depending on the employer size. Connecticut used to only require paid sick leave for service industry employees, but now it's going to require for all employers with 25 or more employees. And then Michigan also expanded its requirements. It's going to apply to all employers, and they increased the amount of leave required to 72 hours annually. So you may notice some overlap there. Some states have different requirements based on the size of the company, especially if you're looking at like, well, I'm seeing them, they have to require both paid leave and unpaid leave. And again, that's going to be a difference based on the size of the employer. Remember that some cities and counties have their own requirements for hours worked in that city or in that county. And if you're a federal contractor, you may need to provide paid sick leave for hours worked on a federal contract. A couple of related changes just due to paid leave. California has expanded the reasons for which employees may use paid sick leave. They expanded the list of crimes for which somebody can take leave if they're a victim of a crime, and then now they can take leave if a family member is a victim of a crime as well. And in New York now requires employers to pay for 20 hours of paid leave for prenatal care during any 52-week period. So basically once a year, but that year is not necessarily set.
Absolutely. What do you feel are some best practices?
Yeah, so paid sick leave can be a little tricky if it's new. You're like, well, we've never provided it, or maybe we have, but now there's a whole bunch of new laws that we have to comply with. So first, you want to make sure you understand the various components of the requirements of your state's laws. I'd say most importantly, really know the technical requirements. Can the hours be accrued or front loaded? If it's accrued, what's the required rate? So, how many hours? They're usually worded that they must accrue so many hours of paid sick leave per every hour worked. Is there a requirement for carryover or caps or limits on those? So all of the state's laws all have little nuances that make them unique to their state. So you want to make sure you get the policy set up correctly. If you're in multiple states and you want just one policy, you're going to need to comply with the greatest requirement of each of those components or consider having separate policies for each state. You are going to want to make sure you post the required notices. And a couple of things to watch out for. So cities and counties, so that might have their own requirements. So if you have employees working in those jurisdictions, you're going to need to comply with those as well. And then one of the things that's often overlooked are the anti-retaliation provisions. I think they all have something written into the law where there's an anti-retaliation provision for this protected time off. It's job protection. So I'll give a couple examples of where that can happen. So holiday pay. Lots of us have policies that say in order to receive holiday pay, if you provide paid holidays, you must work the day before and the day after the holiday, unless you have maybe like a pre-approved vacation. Well, let's say now you have an employee who calls out sick the day after the holiday and they have available paid sick leave. And you say, oh, our policy says we don't have to pay you for that. That can easily be construed as retaliation for using their paid sick leave. And by you not paying their holiday, you now have a retaliation claim against you under the paid sick leave law. Another area for that is disciplinary action. So in HR, we're always going to tell you this, documentation is your best friend. You want to make sure that you're always documenting whenever you're taking any kind of adverse action or disciplinary action against an employee. So how this plays out is with paid sick leave is in the laws, there is oftentimes written in that there is a 90-day basically period around employees using or asking about or even asking about their balance of paid sick leave, that there is a presumption that if adverse action is taken against the employee, that the employer is retaliating against the employee. So it sounds ridiculous, but this is what happens. And if you don't have documentation to show why you know, wrote up your employee or fired them or demoted them, and it was around the time they took paid sick leave, again, they could have an opportunity there for a paid sick leave claim. So we want to watch out for those. So that's kind of some practical areas on some ways that those can kind of sneak up on you. So while you are documenting all of your actions, another thing with these paid sick leave laws is that most of the time employees are not required to provide documentation of their absence. So you'll want to look in your state if it allows for documentation of that paid sick leave at all. Or some of them, like here in Arizona, you can require documentation on the third consecutive day of absence. I understand it's very frustrating, but this is why it's important that you know what your state's law is so that you can write your policies and make sure you're addressing those things. The other important piece, you want to make sure your supervisors understand and comply. They're the ones out there talking to your employees, responding to text when they say they're sick. So you want to make sure they're not like asking them to find a replacement. That's also not allowed. So this is why it's really important for you to understand and then make sure your supervisors understand. Then you're going to have a written policy that outlines not only the technical components, but some of these things like advance notice, like how often or how much in advance they need to request time off, any of their rehire provisions. So if they are terminated and come back, when you have to reinstate unused balances. So the policy should outline all of those and also make it easy to understand so that your employees and your supervisors and your payroll people can all comply with the law. Lastly, I recommend automating this. So if you haven't yet had to provide paid sick time, or if you're still tracking time in Excel, which we see a lot, a timekeeping system will help tremendously. It should be able to capture all the working parts of the policy, and it's best if it's incorporated into your payroll system.
That was a lot. Wow.
It's a lot, I know.
To document it all. All right. State paid family and or medical leave.
Yeah, so another type of mandatory paid leave is paid family and medical leave. These are most often state-run programs that are funded through payroll taxes, but some, like New York, they require the employer to actually purchase a disability insurance plan. So new states adding these programs have payroll tax contributions starting this year, with benefits available to employees in 2026. So just like with paid sick leave law, know your state law's requirements and effective dates, knowing that your obligations may depend on the size of your company. You want to review your current benefit plans and policies for any overlap to determine if changes are needed and develop a written policy. Once it's closer to implementation of employees actually being able to use the benefits, you'll want to ensure you post any required notices, set up and collect the payroll taxes, make the contribution and file reports, and lastly, help employees with the benefits process when they have a claim. So they're not necessarily going to come to you and say, I need to file a claim with the state for paid family leave. You're just going to hear that Joe's wife had a baby, and that's your clue. You need to give him information about the program and your company's policy, and then as well as respond timely to any paperwork that you receive from the state or the insurance company.
So, do you have any advice for multi-state employers and how they face these unique challenges?
Yeah, I think employers trying to force a one size fits all policy when it just doesn't work. Um, if you are trying like, oh, well, we just want everybody to have the same thing, that might sound good and sound easy for you, but if it's putting you out of compliance, then that's not going to be in your best interest or the employees. Another thing is like on the paid sick leave, sometimes they just want to lump everything together into a combined PTO policy.
Mhm.
So a robust timekeeping system will be able to handle multiple policies if needed, whether it's by state or by maybe job classification. And sometimes just calling everything PTO can often introduce more problems than it solves. So,
Mhm.
as we stressed, employers really need to understand the specifics of the laws that apply to their employees and then ensure those requirements are being met.
Pay transparency across all these states. It sounds complicated.
It can be, and like paid sick leave, this has been a fast growing trend over the last few years. States are adding laws requiring employers to disclose the pay range and sometimes benefits in their job
Mhm.
postings. So you can see the states that recently added or are adding this law for 2025, and the requirements vary by employer size. So, for example, in Illinois, it's required for employers with 15 or more employees. Massachusetts, it's 25. Minnesota, it's 30. And in Vermont, it's just 5. Some states also prohibit employers from asking applicants about salary history pre offer. So, no new states this year, but we always like to make sure employers are aware so that your applications, your recruiters, your hiring managers aren't asking for that information. Salary history can be verified after the job offer has been made, but cannot be asked about prior.
Mm. What about mandatory employer sponsored meetings? I know there's a big change with this.
Yeah, California and Illinois joined a handful of states that prohibit employers from requiring employees to attend meetings on religious, political, or union matters. So, while I hope most employers aren't even holding meetings on religion and politics, it's very possible that they may require meetings regarding unions. So, even if you're not, what you really want to watch out for are anti retaliation provisions. So, like with paid sick leave, if an employer takes some type of disciplinary action around the time a meeting is held, it may give the employee the opportunity for the claim that the employer will have to spend time and money defending. So, again, documentation is your best friend. Make sure that when you are taking disciplinary action, adverse action against an employee, that you're documenting the reasons for those. Um, these laws are already facing a variety of legal challenges, so we are going to have to wait and see what happens. But for now, this is what's in effect.
Colorado biometrics.
Yeah, Colorado amended its Privacy Act to require employers to adopt policies and obtain consent before collecting and using biometric information. So we see this in the employment context, typically in time clocks that use fingerprint or facial recognition and certain types of key card access. Colorado employers that use biometrics should review the regulations, adopt a written policy, and then start collecting consent forms from their employees.
There are changes in the Nevada heat illness prevention regulation, correct?
Yeah, it's similar to California, has already had one in place, but it's not as arduous. But Nevada does have a new regulation for this. It does not apply to businesses with climate control. So if you're in an office, you're not covered. Covered businesses, so if heat exposure is potentially an issue, you're required to conduct a job hazard analysis for job classifications where the majority of employees are occupationally exposed to risk factors for heat illness for more than 30 minutes of any 60 minutes, not including breaks. So where those heat illness conditions exist, then the employer must create a written plan and provide training. The written plan includes provisions for potable water, a rest break when employees exhibit symptoms of heat illness, prevention for employees to cool down, monitoring by a designated person, identification and mitigation of work processes that generate additional heat or humidity, training for employees regarding safety protocols, and procedures for responding to an emergency. As of yesterday, the guidance is still not posted, so the enforcement date is still TBD, as you can see there on the slide, that basically once the guidance is published, employers must comply within 90 days of that.
Understood. And California, if you know, you know. It's a
Yeah,
lot.
even if you don't have employees in California, you're probably aware of its reputation. Before we get into these changes, if you were in Southern California, you're probably not listening to this right now. But our
Oh,
thoughts and prayers are with everyone going through this devastation from the fires. I lived in Los
horrible.
Angeles. I worked on Sunset Boulevard. I hiked those canyons. So, and I
Mhm.
know we have clients that have been evacuated and some that are still waiting to hear if their business is still standing. So our thoughts are with everyone out there. Um, so part of the presentation, though, this is certainly not all of the new regs for California for 2025, but some of the ones where employers may need to review and update their policies and practices. So first, job postings. Codified now into law, employer cannot list the driver license as a requirement in a posting unless driving is an essential function. So review your job postings. For paid family leave, employers can no longer require an employee to use vacation for the first 2 weeks of paid family leave. However, the employee may choose to. So, if you're not familiar, California has state paid family leave. Employers used to be able to require the employee to use any available vacation time in those first 2 weeks. They can't do that anymore. So, review your written leave policies. Victims of violence, another one to check your written policies, as this expanded the list of crimes for which an employee can take time off and allows employees to take time off to help a family member who's a victim of those crimes, as we mentioned when we talked about paid sick leave. So check your policies for that. And then lastly, your anti-discrimination laws. So these bills update definitions that may be spelled out in your policies. You might not, but if they are, you're going to want to update them. So SB 1137 specified that not only are employees protected against discrimination in certain protected classes, but they're also protected for a combination or any combination of those protected classes and the perception that an employee is in a protected class. AB 1815 removed the words historically, so from the definition of race. So now it's inclusive of traits associated with race, including but not limited to hair texture and protective hairstyles, and further states protective hairstyles include but are not limited to hairstyles such as braids, locks, and twists. So you just want to make sure that if you've got specific verbiage in those policies that you are looking at what the regs now state and updating that accordingly.
Well, let's review our webinar. We have gotten through most of the points today.
Yeah, I recommend employers review their exempt personnel salaries, even though the threshold is back down much lower, but you still want to make sure you're meeting federal and any state requirements, as well as any changes that may have already occurred. So, for example, you may have changed a salary employee to hourly, but that person works no overtime and they might be perfectly happy to go back to salary and not have to record their hours. So again, it really depends on what your organization structure is, what those job duties are, as well as the budget, but kind of take a look if you did make changes, if you need to go back and change anything else at this time. And then federal contractors should familiarize themselves with the resurrected reporting requirements, make sure they have the capability to comply, but watch to see if it gets blocked first. And then lastly, for kind of all the rest, make sure you know and understand your state's laws and reach out to an employment law specialist if you do have questions.
There we go. My screen would not move forward, but I got it. Let's answer some of these great questions that are coming in, and we have several of them. And one is from Jeanette, and she says, if an employee doesn't show up for work, then requests sick pay on their timesheet, do we have to pay?
Yes, in a word. Yeah, so it's super frustrating, these laws, because they're just not practical. But because most of them say if the need for leave is foreseeable, the employee needs to request time off with like X amount of days before the need. Usually it's 7. So if I'm going to schedule a dentist appointment, I have to give them my employer at least 7 days notice. However, if the leave need is unforeseeable, they need to provide notice as soon as practical. So if the employee doesn't show up and then they come back to work the next day and then they put it on their time card and they say, oh, yeah, sorry, I was in the urgent care, I was in the hospital and I couldn't contact you, there's
Mhm.
nothing you can do. So it just sucks. I know. Usually my advice is let employees use up their paid sick leave, burn through those days. Separate from that, you're addressing any kind of performance issues, anything else going on, you're documenting those things. It doesn't mean you can't fire an employee when they have available paid sick leave. You just want to make sure you're not disciplining them for those absences. And then when the time comes for they do have something that you can terminate them for, you've got documentation to show why, and it has really nothing to do with those absences.
That makes perfect sense. And Teresa asks us for mandatory sick leave, is the employee count based on year round or seasonal?
This is also going to be different from every state. So some of them, it's going to depend on the number of employees at the beginning of the year.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's in the last 52 weeks. Sometimes it's based on, I'm trying to think of what the others are. The other thing to watch out for is where are you counting your employees? So if you're multi-state, it's going to vary. So if you're in California, you're going to count all of your employees worldwide, is what they
Mhm.
say. If you're in Arizona, you're an employer in Arizona, you're only counting employees that are working here. So if I'm an Arizona employer and I have 5 employees working in Arizona, but I have 20 working in New Mexico, you're a small employer by Arizona standards because you only have 5 working in the state. You only have to provide small employer amount of paid sick leave, and you only have to provide it to those 5. So it is
Okay.
really something you're going to want to look up state by state.
Mhm.
It
Uh,
usually will state it in the regs. If there's something that's missed in the actual regs, it will usually come out then in the state's guidance.
The next question is from Sheena, and she asks, in California, can you require exempt employees to clock their hours for time tracking purposes?
Not for time tracking. I'm back up. Yes, you can. You can do it for time tracking, but you can't do it for pay purposes. So let's say you just require them to clock in and out because your office schedule is 8 to 5 and they're supposed to be there, and that's fine. But when they don't work those hours, you can't dock their pay most of the time. There's a very few instances in which you can actually dock a salaried employee's pay. But you can, for sure, you can make them punch a clock for sure. A lot of employers do this for job costing purposes. So think like an engineering firm, you have engineers that are definitely, they're exempt under the professional exemption, and that's fine. But everything that they work on has to be job costed out to what they're working on. You can
Mhm.
absolutely make them punch. If it's, I don't typically recommend it if you're just like, well, we want to make sure that they're there from 8 to 5, because then it's going to be like, well, why are you doing it? But just make sure you're not docking for partial day absences for salary employees.
So we are running just a tiny bit over, but we do have a couple more questions. So I say let's continue because I know we're really helping people here and they need to
Yeah,
have their questions
absolutely.
answered. Okay. Cindy asked, is there employee size or threshold for the OFCCP in California?
So
That
so
makes
that's
sense.
for the reporting. So it's not going to be by state. So OFCCP is the federal reporting.
Mhm.
Off the top of my head, or let me see if I can get my information really quickly. I think it has to do with the size of the contract, not the size of the employer. So again, it's not going to
Mhm.
be state, it's going to be federal. So if the question is specific to the reporting, I'm looking at my notes here. Employers with a federal construction contract or subcontract and/or federally assisted construction contract or subcontract in excess of $10,000. must complete and submit monthly form CC 257. So it's not going to be an employer size, it's going to be based on that contract dollar amount.
Wonderful. Understood. Okay, Laura asked, does the sick leave for before and after holiday apply to PTO policies or only for sick leave time?
So it's really only for sick leave time, but because I think I'm trying to look at the questions, if the Laura is the Laura that I think, they only have a paid time off policy. They don't have sick. So they do have a combined PTO. So we don't offer something that's called sick. We just say PTO and you can use it for everything. Because you're using paid time off to satisfy the requirements of the state's paid sick leave laws, yes, that is going to apply to that as well, because you're saying, well, we don't offer sick, we offer PTO, but yes, I comply with the law by providing PTO. Your
Mhm.
PTO policy has to do everything a sick policy needs to. So in that scenario with the holiday, yes, if you were to restrict an employee or not give them their holiday pay, but they have PTO available, I think you'd be at risk for a retaliation claim on that.
All right, I think we're going to do one more question here, and it is, should the heat illness written safety plan be mentioned in the employee handbook or just in the separate safety plan?
I always recommend put safety stuff separate. So usually in an employee handbook, I like to see a general section on safety that says you want to cover the OSHA general duty clause that employers must provide a safe and helpful workplace. So things like you must follow all procedures, you must follow supervisor's directions, you need to report anything unsafe. But then when you get to specific things, have that in a separate safety document. That way you can get to the specifics. It might be different by location, it might be different by job duty, it might change. So that way you're not getting into those handbook. And always remember, your handbooks are the first thing that's asked for if you do have any kind of claim or lawsuit that's discoverable. They're going to ask for that. So
Mhm.
yes, there's certain things you do want to put in there, but I'm always a fan on keeping things that are very like really specific procedural into like a separate like procedures manual or something like that, like a safety. And I do just want to know, because I do see that we have several clients on here as well. Obviously, our clients, you're welcome to utilize our HR resources. So give me a call, shoot me an email, make a case from your dashboard for HR, and we'll be happy to answer any of these questions. We're also going to try and go through these and get back to you guys too if there's questions we
Yes,
didn't address
absolutely.
here.
Fantastic. Wow, you have all the information, Andrea. I'm telling you.
Most of the time.
So, thank you all for attending today's webinar, and we hope you found the insights valuable and actionable, something you can really use. Special thanks to Andrea for all of her expertise. And we'd love to continue this conversation. So our team's going to reach out to discuss your specific payroll and compliance needs so that we might be able to better help you achieve your goals this season. That's really what we want to do. And finally, we'll be sending out the recording for your reference. Don't forget to grab your free annual construction payroll checklist for attending live. It's in the top right of the screen in materials. It's your roadmap for a stress-free year. And we'll include a few surprises in our email to you to keep you in the know. Thank you again for joining us. It was awesome. And you have a wonderful day.